Hello, Mr. Fraser here. This is a video intended to help you with your revision of the Carol and Duffy poem originally. Now, this is primarily directed at students studying this at higher, but this could also help you if you're studying this poem at National 5, as many of you will be. Now, before I go any further with annotating the Carol and Duffy poem originally, I should just stress that I'm going to show you my annotation of this poem. It is not by any stretch of the imagination a complete annotation of the poem, and if you are not one of my students and you have a completely different teacher, it may well be that there are things that I've highlighted here that you haven't highlighted with your teacher, and on the other side of the coin, it might be that you've highlighted things with your teacher which are missing from this annotation. The point I'm trying to make is that that doesn't mean that mine is 100% right or your teacher is wrong or vice versa. There's no such thing as a complete annotation. So take this as a support guide, as a bit of an extra tool to aid your revision or to aid your catching up if you've had to spend some time at home as opposed to being in school. So let's start with the first stanza. Let's just begin by reading through it. We came from our own country in a red room, which fell through the fields, our mother singing our father's name to the turn of the wheels. My brothers cried, one of them bawling, home, home, as the miles rushed back to the city, the street, the house, the vacant rooms where we didn't live anymore. I stared at the eyes of a blind toy holding its paw. So already there's an awful lot that we can say about this stanza. Let's begin with this term, this phrase, a red room. Immediately we get a sense that this is not being seen by Duffy as a good change. Now, for context, at this point she's describing being in a car or a bus, we're not entirely sure which, travelling down to England from Scotland with her family in her childhood. And we get a sense that this is not seen as a good thing. And we know this because red has connotations of danger and anger, so the car or bus which they're travelling in is metaphorically described as a red room, suggesting that the speaker is angry, fearful, or even feeling trapped at this emotion. This is far from a happy family journey. Duffy is unhappy with this. We go on to the next line and we hear this interesting phrase, fell through the fields. This is another metaphor. Here, the motion of the car is described as falling through the fields, which suggests that the journey is like free falling. It suggests a great lack of control. This further develops a sense of lacking control and uncertainty. They're not travelling through the countryside. She sees this as falling through the fields. As you can just imagine this idea of free falling, not being able to control what's going on, certainly a very stressful and unpleasant experience for Duffy. But however, the parents are trying to keep everything afloat. The parents are trying to keep the mood up. And we learn that the mother is singing our father's name to the turn of the wheels. And look at that interesting enjambment here. Now, enjambment is when a sentence continues over multiple lines. And what you find is that the word where the enjambment lies is where you get a little bit of extra emphasis. So this sentence, this line here, I should say, ends with the word singing, which gives it a bit more emphasis. And that's quite a stark contrast, because the mum's singing, which is considered to be quite a positive or a happy idea, but that's contrasting directly with the tone that's already been established with the red room and falling through the fields. And that really just further emphasizes the sense of unease. You get this image of a mother desperately trying to keep everyone under control with this pleasant singing, but the kids are not having it. Duffy is anxious, her brothers are bawling. And this idea of the word bawling takes me to my next annotation. Look at this word choice here of bawling. It creates a powerful image of deep sadness. Bawling, of course, has its connotations of crying intensely and maybe even depression. The enjambment of home also adds emphasis to the brothers' cry for the life that they once knew, contrasting further with the mother singing and again reinforcing how unpopular and scary this move has been for the children. Then with this line here, miles rushed back to the city, we once again get this sense of speed and a lack of control, because the miles themselves are personified. Personification is at play here. The miles are rushing back to the city. So again, you get this image of her in a very fast moving car and the miles are rushing back. Her past is going behind her as she's speaking. And this idea of them rushing back again contributes to this sense of unease and a lack of control. And then in the final line of stanza 1, Duffy details that she was finding security by looking into the eyes of a blind toy holding its paw. And there's a lot that you can say about this. The word choice of blind particularly is really interesting, because if you're blind you can't see, and perhaps Duffy herself feels blind at this very moment. The use of blind is used to describe the toy, and it suggests an idea of unclarity, and again an inability to control or comprehend what's ahead. The bear is as blind as the kids are. Holding the toy of the paw is symbolic of the speaker's need for comfort and reassurance at this unstable, unclear, uncontrollable and scary time. We all know what it's like to be a small child and to be distressed, and we may have often done that in our childhood where we clung onto something dear to us, something that brings us comfort. That's what Duffy's doing here, but it's not just any toy. She has to detail that it's a blind toy, bringing again these ideas of not knowing what's ahead of you, being unable to see, having a lack of control, and therefore feeling very anxious and distressed. So overall, this first stanza does not describe a pleasant family journey. It's a very distressing, very traumatic experience for Duffy and her siblings, and perhaps even for her parents as they try and hold everything together with their singing. Now let's move on to stanza 2. All childhood is an emigration. Some are slow, leaving you standing, resigned up an avenue where no one you know stays. Others are sudden, your accent wrong, corners which seem familiar leading to unimagined pebble-dashed estates. Big boys eating worms and shouting words you don't understand. My parents' anxiety stirred like a loose tooth in my head. I want my own country, I said. So this stanza opens up with a memorable metaphor. Duffy is still travelling at this point, but at this point in the poem, she starts to take a moment of reflection and think about the many journeys that we take in life. So she kicks off with all childhood is an emigration. Now, emigrating is the act of leaving your country for somewhere else, going to another country from where you once came from. This suggests that growing up is full of journeys, both mental and physical. In the same way that there are multiple stages to a journey, so too are there multiple stages of life, ever changing and ever moving. And of course, in this poem, we don't just see a geographical change, there's mental and physical changes ahead of Duffy as well. Duffy's thoughts then get more specific, and she starts to think about those many journeys that we take as we grow up. And here we have some interesting use of sentence structure. We start off with a very long, slow and flowing sentence. Some are slow, leaving you standing, resigned up an avenue where no one you know stays. Isn't it interesting that she uses a long, slow and flowing sentence to describe long, slow and flowing changes in life? But then of course, the pace changes quickly, and that contrasts with the next few sentences. Other are sudden, your accent wrong. So we have one very long sentence followed by two very sudden and short sentences. Now as a reader, that's quite jarring. This isn't like the nice rhythm of a nursery rhyme. The poem goes from a nice long, slow place to a very sudden, very short, impactful pace with these short sentences. And often I like to liken this to being in a car that suddenly stops, but then goes again and stops again. It's uncomfortable, it's unsettling. With the pacing of these sentences, with the long flowing sentences followed by two sudden short ones, and then again followed by another long one which comes afterwards, Duffy is almost encouraging you to feel just as chaotic and just as uneasy as she was at this time. It's almost as if you're in the car with her, feeling uneasy, not knowing what's next. As soon as you think things are going at a nice long, slow pace, there's sudden and immediate changes ahead as well. We then get to the bit that often makes a lot of my pupils feel a wee bit disgusted when they read it for the first time, when Duffy starts to talk about the very unusual things that she's seeing in her new English home. She talks about big boys eating worms and shouting words you don't understand. And I like to think this serves two functions. First of all, it's just a strange idea, seeing boys eating worms, and that's the whole point. This new place that she's in is strange. The customs are strange. And she's not saying that all English people like eating worms. She's just merely telling you that this is a very unusual and of course uncomfortable thing that she saw, which is not at all like what she was used to at home. But if we even zoom in a little bit further, the second function here lies with the word choice. Big boys and shouting. These are very aggressive words with aggressive connotations. So not only is their behaviour strange, their manner is scary and aggressive. And this really just sets and really reaffirms this idea that this new home is not comfortable for Duffy. She doesn't want to be there. It's uncomfortable. The people there are very aggressive and she wants to go home. And you get that sense reinforced by this line here. I want our own country, I said. But before that, we have more techniques. For example, this fantastic use of simile. My parents' anxiety stirred like a loose tooth in my head. There's a lot going on here. Now, we've got the simile, the comparison of two things using like or as, and she's talking about her parents' anxiety and saying that it's stirring like a loose tooth. Now, if you think back to having loose teeth in your mouth, a loose tooth is very weak, very fragile, and at any moment it can snap off and it's gone. And that really suggests that her parents' anxiety is equally fragile. The emotions are high, and we're at kind of a breaking point here. At any moment, just like a loose tooth, things could break, things could fall apart. This is a fragile situation that we're in. But also notice the enjambment here of the word tooth. Duffy has deliberately put that at the very end of the line. So the enjambment makes it seem like the word tooth itself is hanging on at the edge, just like a real loose tooth in your mouth would, just hanging on. So you get this sense of fragility, of everything being quite delicate. Tensions are high, and at any moment things could snap and we could find ourselves having an emotional breakdown perhaps. Then the final stanza. And at this point, we start to see Duffy slowly adapting to the changes around her. Now, she's not necessarily loving her life in England, but she's getting a bit more used to the changes. It's not as scary as it was in stanzas 1 and 2. She's adapting. But then you forget, or don't recall, or change, and seeing your brother swallow a slug, feel only a skelf of shame. I remember my tongue shedding its skin like a snake in my voice, in the classroom, sounding just like the rest. Do I only think I lost a river, culture, speech, sense of first space, and the right place? Now, where do you come from? Strangers ask, originally. And I hesitate. Now there's a lot going on in this stanza, this final stanza, and I've already pre-highlighted a lot of what I'm going to discuss. First of all, we open up with the word but. This conjunction would indicate a change, a turning point, a change of focus. So at this point, we're getting clued up and a wee hint that Duffy's going to be changing in some way. In this case, we start to learn that she's slowly adapting to her surroundings. We then get a list with you forget or don't recall or change. You forget or don't recall or change. Notice that repetition of or there. She's not quite sure, she can't quite pinpoint what's caused it or where the change lies. But something is different. It suggests a certain degree of hesitancy. She can't quite define it. You forget or don't recall or change. The next annotation I would like to highlight is this term here, this phrase, a skelf of shame. So she's using this phrase to describe how she feels at her accent changing and at things, her slow, gradual adaptation, I should say, to her new English surroundings. And she describes that she only feels a skelf of shame. Such an interesting metaphor there with really important word choice in it. So if you're Scottish, you'll probably know that a skelf is a tiny wee jag, a wee splint that you can get in your skin. Now, a skelf is painful, but not hugely. It's irritating, but you can deal with it. Now, isn't it interesting that that's how she describes her shame? She has a bit of shame. She still feels like she's abandoned her Scottish identity, but it's not weighing her down. It's just there. It's a wee bit of shame niggling away at her. And notice that it's a skelf of shame, i.e. a Scots word. It's not really an English word, skelf. If you're saying, oh, you've got a wee skelf, that's a very Scottish word. So she's describing her shame at losing her Scottish identity, but interestingly, she uses it with a Scots word, suggesting there is still that wee bit of Scots to her. And then we come to a very quotable, very memorable simile. My tongue shedding its skin like a snake. And of course here, she's describing the process of losing her Scottish accent and sounding more English. And even to this day, if you hear Caroline Duffy speaking, you'll notice that she does have a somewhat English accent. And of course, we know that snakes shed their skin, and there's interesting alliteration there, sibilants, to really complement the sound of a snake. But it's a powerful simile, I should say, to describe that gradual process. Her tongue is shedding its skin like a snake. I always think that by comparing it to a snake, it's not seen in a very positive light. Snakes usually suggest betrayal in literature, so that's perhaps something that Duffy is thinking about when using this simile. She is changing, but there is a sense of betrayal or abandoning her previous identity. And for further evidence of that, look back to the idea of the fact that she feels a skelf of shame. And finally, the last annotation that I wish to highlight is this short sentence which the poem ends on, this idea of "and I hesitate." This poem ends on a very, very clear but uncertain note. It's clear in its statement, but its subject is one of uncertainty. People ask her, where do you come from? and she genuinely doesn't know. She hesitates because yes, she's born and bred in Scotland, but as we've just learned, she's left so much of that behind. The river, the culture, the sense of first space. She's lost her accent. She only feels a little bit of shame, a skelf of shame about that. But yet she can't claim to be English because she's not English. So when people ask her, she's got a proper identity crisis going on. And the poem ends on that note of uncertainty and of totally not knowing who you are and where you truly belong. So that was a very quick run through of annotating Carol Ann Duffy's Originally, and I'm sure you've noticed there are other techniques there that I didn't discuss in this short video. Again, this is really just here to be a support to your revision, a tool for catching up if you've had to self-isolate and miss time in the classroom. So I hope this has been helpful. Thanks very much for watching, and give me an email if you have any questions. Thanks a lot.